Hey, Embrace. How's everybody doing today? Good to have you joining us. My name's Travis. I'm the pastor at the T campus. I preached last week, but I didn't tell you I was going to preach again this week because I was afraid no one would want to come back. So I was just like, I'm not going to say that because no one's going to come back. They like the short, bald guy better than the tall, bald guy. But I'm here again, tricked you into being here with us, but we're excited that you've joined us. We're in a series called Peeled Back, where we've been looking at our lives, and Adam said our lives are like an onion. There's lots of layers. We have to peel them back, and so that we can know ourselves, so that we might know God. So the first week we talked about peeling back our emotions. Last week we talked about peeling back our past. Today I'm going to open the message, and I'm pretty sure no one has opened a message like this in the history of Embrace. I'm going to ask you a riddle. Who's excited about answering a riddle? Nobody. Okay. If you know the answer to this, yell it out. Type it in online. Yell it out at your campus too. I crawl on the earth and I rise on a pillar. I go swimming, but never get wet. I can get as big as an elephant and still weigh nothing. Everyone has me and no one can lose me. What am I? Anybody? Someone got it last service. Shadow. Good job, man. Get this guy a free coffee. Oh, they're already free. Whatever. It is a shadow. Shadow's really interesting if you start to think about it. Our shadow follows us everywhere. Our shadow is the shape of us. Darkness hides our shadow. Light reveals our shadow. Our shadow looks a lot like us, but it's probably more accurate to say our shadow looks a lot like the darker version of us. Our shadow looks like the darker version of us. So I'm not going to talk about physical shadows today, but what I want to talk about is our inner shadow. That part of us that's inside that looks a lot like us, but it might just be the darker version of us. So I want to define what I mean by inner shadow, but I'm going to just say it's been difficult this week to get a good definition of this. It's a complex idea that we have this sort of inner dark side. But Pete Scazzaro, who wrote the book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, he also wrote a book, Emotionally Healthy Leader. And this is the definition. I kind of condensed it, but this is the definition Pete gives of the shadow. Your shadow is the dark, damaged, and mostly hidden version of you that influences your behaviors. Let me say that one more time. Your shadow is the dark, damaged, and mostly hidden, that's important, mostly hidden version of you that influences your behaviors. Basically, we're not just one person, we kind of have two people inside of us. You know what I'm talking about? Have you felt this in you? We have this dark side of us that's a little damaged and it's hidden. We don't naturally see it, but it's influencing everything that we do. Let me give you an example about this. I'm a pastor, obviously, and I love being a pastor. I love being able to serve God. I love working with people. But there is a part of me that just loves attention. There's part of me that loves it when people think highly of me, which you're like, why'd you go as a pastor to be but that loves to be thought highly of. That's my shadow. So my shadow is, I became a pastor because I love God, but I also became a pastor because I love attention. Now, I'm a little worried that I even shared that with all you guys because that's ugly. That's really ugly. Like I'm doing some stuff here that's really important and I'm thinking about getting attention and wanting you to think highly of me. It's ugly, but it's in me. It's in there. I know it's in there. Do you know what's in you? Do you see the shadow in your life? That duality inside of you. You might have a good motive, but that also has that evil motive as well. You have a shadow. The question really is, how much of your shadow has you? Let me say that one more time. You have a shadow side. The question is really how much of your shadow has you? How much of your life, how much of your behaviors, how much of who you are is being influenced? This hidden influence in our lives is being influencing you. So today I want to look at a powerful story. It's the story of Cain and Abel. Now, this story is not an inspiring story. I'm just going to tell you, even this whole message, I'm like, God, this is not really an inspiring message. Cain's story is not inspiring. Cain's story is a warning. It's a warning for all of us. This is what happens when we don't know our shadow, understand our shadow, and we let our shadow take control. So let's read the story. So Cain and Abel, they were the first children of Adam and Eve. Adam knew his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept the flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So we got two brothers, Cain and Abel. They're both farmers. Cain farms and harvests the ground, and Abel, he works with the livestock. And they both decide that they're going to bring this offering to the Lord. Now, this is where things get interesting. Cain's offering is not accepted by God, and Abel's offering is accepted. God doesn't like Cain's offering, but he likes Abel's offering. He likes Abel's offering. Now, at first glance of this story, there isn't really a reason that we can see why God would prefer Abel's offering to Cain. It says that they brought first fruits. So that means they both brought the best. Cain brought the best crops. Abel, he brought the best livestock. So why would God choose one over the other? But later on in the story of the Bible, in a book called Hebrews, we find out that the reason why God chose Abel's offering over Cain's is because Cain brought his offering with impure motives. He brought him with impure motives. This is really important in this story. Cain's motive for bringing the offering didn't please God. Now, we don't know his motive. Maybe his motive was to look good in front of God. Maybe he wanted to look better than his brother. Maybe he brought his offering with a bitter spirit. But God wasn't judging the content of Cain's offering. God was judging the motive of Cain's offering. That's important to get. Not the content of his offering, but the motive for his offering. Our shadow side has motives. Some of these motives, they're hidden from us, but they are never hidden from God. Never hidden from God. We might be able to convince the people of this world that we're doing things for the right reasons, but God always knows what we are doing and why we are doing it. It's a little scary to think about. God always knows what we're doing and why we are doing it. The motives of our shadow are never hidden from him, but are they hidden from you? Do you know the motives of your shadow side? Let me give you some examples. Why do you volunteer at that organization? Is it because you want to help people, or do you want to appear helpful? Why did you decide to not apply for that job? Is it because it wasn't a good fit? Or was your shadow side just fearful of failing? Why do you talk about other people? Is it because you want what's best for them? Or is it that your shadow side loves to see people fail? Why do you post all kinds of stuff on Facebook? Is it because you have something of value to say? Or does your shadow need to be validated? Why do you plan out everything in your life? Is it because you are wise with your time, or is your shadow a control freak? And why are you at church today? Why are you here at church today? Because you love and want to worship God, or does your shadow just feel guilty when you don't show up? I mean, when I started thinking of these, we could go on forever and ever and ever. Almost every single thing that we do is influenced by this shadow in our lives. The motives of our shadow are damaged, broken, and ugly, and they influence everything in our life. Once again, the question isn't if you have a shadow. The question is, how much does your shadow have you? Now, God's rejection of Cain's offering, that seems unfair to some of us. It seems like, God, you're being a little bit harsh. This was the best thing God could do for Cain. This was a blessing. He rejected his offering. He revealed the motives of his heart. Now Cain has the ability. Cain can dig in deep into his life, evaluate these motives, and make a choice to follow God. But he doesn't. Let's look more in the story. Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. This word anger in the original language of the Bible, it means to burn. You felt that before, haven't you? To burn. Like literally, it's like a fire burning down a forest. Like this anger inside of Cain, the shadow inside of Cain, it's burning him down. His face was downcast. It literally means his face fell to the ground. Instead of his face rising to the heavens to see God, it fell to the ground to look at his shadow. And this word downcast, it means self-pity. Self-pity. Have you felt those two emotions before? I have. Burning anger and self-pity. And these are dangerous emotions, because when you mix anger and self-pity together, do you know what you get? Resentment. Resentment is bitter hatred for others. When you mix anger and self-pity together, you get resentment. Anger, self-pity, and resentment are emotions that are rooted in our shadow. And this is the most important part about that. They are emotions that look to place blame on everything outside of us. These emotions, they are mad at things outside of us. Cain's problem is his own problem. He brought an offering with impure motives. He needs to deal with the shadow inside of him. But instead of dealing with the shadow inside of him, he's blaming everything outside of him. Cain is angry because of something outside of him. God didn't accept his offering. Cain is feeling self-pity because of something outside of him. God didn't treat him fairly. Cain is resentful because of something outside of him. His brother looks better than him. And this is what the shadow does. It wants us to blame everything on the outside instead of dealing with the darkness inside. I believe that this is mostly true. Anytime we start to blame everything on the outside and not deal with the darkness inside, we're firmly in our shadow. That's where our shadow wants us. I'll be honest. I think a lot of this year, 2020, has been this. Anger, self-pity, and resentment, I think they have to be at an all-time high. People are placing the blame on everything outside of them, and there is issues outside of them. I'm not trying to say that. They're placing everything on the issues outside of them, but we aren't dealing with the shadows inside of us. When you find these three emotions, anger, self-pity, and resentment, you will find your shadow. We have to deal with them, or it's going to take control of us like it did Cain. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, and it desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Sin is crouching. That word is used for like a lion crouching in the pounce position. You know, you've seen your kitty cats do that before, and they're mean too. You know, sitting ready to pounce. Sin is waiting to pounce. It's at your door. What is the door? The door is the opening to your home. The door is the opening to our lives. Sin is sitting there. It is ready to pounce at the opening of your door, and your shadow is just waiting to invite it in. crouching at your door, and its desire is to have you. That means to devour you. It's like the lion. It wants to come in. It doesn't want to come in and do a tea party with you. It doesn't want to play games with you. It wants to devour you. And it wants your shadow to take over. But God says, you must rule over it. That's one of the most beautiful lines in this whole passage. God's saying, I know all the anger and the resentment and the bitterness. I know all the impure motives, but guess what? Sin is crouching at your door, but you can reign over it. Like a king reigns over a kingdom, you still have a choice. And I think that's what God's saying to us today. Like, you have a choice. You don't have to follow your shadow. You can reign over it. God literally says, if you do what is good, you will be accepted. That word accepted in the original language, it means to lift your head up. I know, God's saying, I know your head's at the ground. I know you're wallowing in anger, resentment, self-pity, impure motives. But if you would just do what was good, I can lift your head back up. I can lift your head off the ground and on the shadows to a God who loves you. So Cain has a choice. Is he going to wallow in his self-pity, anger, resentment, or is he going to lift his head up? Let's see what Cain does. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother and killed him. Cain lets his shadow take full control by going to the darkest place and killing his brother. There's a short story by a guy named Hans Christian Andersen. He wrote like The Emperor's New Clothes and Little Mermaid. But the short story I'm referring to is called The Shadow. If you have a chance, Google it. It's just, you can read it free online. It's not super long, but it's a really cool story. So I want to give you kind of the highlights of this story. It's about a man who lost his shadow. His shadow just disappeared. And years go by with this man. Years and years go by, and he ends up hitting some really rough times. Things are not going well for this man, and all of a sudden he hears a knock on the door. He hears this knock on the door, and guess who it was? It was his shadow. His shadow was at the door. His shadow had turned into a man. And so the man, he invites his shadow in, they sit and they eat, and the shadow realizes that this man is really on rough, hard times. And so the shadow says, hey, I want to invite you on a vacation with me. I want you to go on a trip with me, and I'm going to pay for all the expenses. And so the man's like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. But the shadow says, there's a catch. On the trip, you need to become my shadow. If you're following me, he becomes the shadow of his shadow. So the man was poor. He wanted to go on a trip, so he decides to go on this trip. So they're on this vacation for a little while, and the shadow is treating the man very poorly. And so the man's like, I'm done with this. I'm not going to be his shadow anymore. I'm going to go home. So he goes and he tells his shadow, he says, I'm going to go home. But the shadow couldn't let him go home because his whole purpose the entire time was take over the life of the man. So instead of letting him go home, he killed the man and he took over his life. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? But it's not much more different than what we've just read. This is the story of Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel, but Cain's shadow killed him. It took him over. It consumed him. It turned him into a murderer. If your shadow took over, how bad do you think things could get? One of the ways I think we can get a picture into how bad things could get is to look at our daydreams, the things that we daydream about. The other day I was driving on the interstate and I was getting off the ramp and someone was literally tailgating me. It was like inches behind me. inches behind me. I just daydream. I'm like, I'm just going to slam on my brakes. And that guy's, he's going to plow right into the back of me. I'm going to dent up the front of their nice vehicle. Then I'm going to get out of my minivan and say, hey, you don't mess with a dad in a minivan. That's what I was going to say. You got 2 minivans, 2 of them, so you can dent one. Do you have daydreams like this? So seriously, be honest. Like, you're maybe a better human being than me, but I don't think you are. I think we're all in the same boat. Do you have daydreams like this? Have you ever daydreamed just to flip someone off? I'm just going to give this person the bird. You maybe done it too. I don't know. Have you ever daydreamed about ripping someone to shreds with your words? Like a boss, like, I'm just going to go in there. I'm going to say this. I'm going to do this. This is, I think, more of a dude thing, but women, you might do this too. Have you ever daydreamed about punching someone in the face? Yeah, I saw some heads nodding there. I've done that. I haven't done that. I've daydreamed it. Have you ever daydreamed about ruining someone's reputation on Facebook, online, through gossip? These daydreams are a window to our soul of how bad it could get if we let our shadow take control. And the truth is, and this is hard to hear, if you and I weren't such cowards, we'd probably do some of these things. If you and I removed all the social norms for society, we would probably take part in some of the daydreams we've dreamed about. I want you to just think about this for a second. If you got 1% more resentful every week for 20 years, so every week for 20 years, you just got 1% more resentful. By the end of 20 years, you'd be 30,000 times more resentful than you started. It's compound interest. I did the math. 30,000 times. You wouldn't recognize that person. That's how bad your shadow can get if we keep walking down the road. Carl Jung said this. He said, your shadow leads straight to hell. And I think that's true. If we let it, this is what happened to Cain. It can keep dragging us down. This story is not about us trying to avoid being Cain. That's not what the story's about. It's a warning that Cain's already in us. In every story, there is a hero and a villain. In our story, we are both. Cain is our shadow. Cain is the wounded, damaged, resentful, bitter, angry, revenge-seeking, murderous part of us that we don't want to believe exists in us. But it does. So what do we do with it? How do we control it? As I close, I want to give you three ways that you can help control your shadow. The first is identify it. The best way to identify your shadow is to question your motives. I know this sounds crazy, but literally ask yourself this question every single day, multiple times a day. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And dig deep. Why am I doing? And don't trust yourself because, man, the shadow is hidden, right? It's deceptive. Why am I doing what I am doing? Dig deep into that. And don't feel shame for that because we all got a shadow. It doesn't help to just feel shameful about it, but ask that question so that you can understand your shadow, so you can see that it's there. First thing we need to do is identify it. Second thing that we need to do is stop feeding it. Jesus said this in a letter called Matthew. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than to lose your whole body. Jesus is basically saying, hey, there's parts of you that you just got to cut off. You got to cut off. You got to stop feeding some of these things in your life. What are you listening to? What are we watching? Where are we going on the weekends? What environments are we in? What people are we hanging out with? These are really good questions because these things are feeding our shadows or they're making us be better people. Well, one or the other. So ask that question. You might need to cut some stuff off to take control of your shadow. Third thing that we need to do is we need to light it up. Jesus said this, the people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. This is such a great verse. And for those who lived in the land where death cast its shadow, a light has shined. A light has shined. Man, it's not enough to identify it. It's not enough to stop feeding it. We got to shine some light on this thing. When you shine light on a shadow, you see it more clearly. If you shine a lot of light on a shadow, you can make it disappear. You can make it disappear. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. He didn't say that by any mistake. I can light up the darkness in your life. You are being influenced by your shadow. Why don't you be influenced by me instead? Why don't you start walking towards me instead? I mean, we've been given a gift. We have 4 books in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They are the story about Jesus. We as Christians should read those every day, and we should look at Jesus and like, what's he like? I want to be like him. What's he saying? I want to say what he said. What is he thinking? I want to think what he thinks, what he's been thinking. Jesus is our ideal. He can light up our shadow. We don't have to be influenced in this way. We can follow Jesus instead. It's like Jesus, he's our anti-shadow. He's the sword with which we fight the battle. I can't encourage you enough. If you want to start to purify your life, read about Jesus and just start following him. Read about Jesus and start doing what he did. Read about Jesus and start thinking like he thought. And man, he will start to purify your heart and your emotions. So those are the 3 things. Identify it, stop feeding it, light it up. I just wanted to close with this question again for all of us. I think it's such a good question. We all have a shadow. How much does your shadow have you? I'm fully aware this is not a rah-rah, tackle the world sort of message as you leave. Some messages are inspiration, some are warnings, and this one's a little bit more of a warning. But I think this is a great question to ask yourself. I've been wrestling with this all week. I had dreams about my shadow last night. I won't get into them, but I had dreams about my ulterior motives. And I know it's so easy to just get like shameful and overwhelmed by it, but it's so good. It's so good for us to question our motives. Don't let it stop you for doing stuff in the world, but question what you do. See how much of the shadow has you. Cain is in us, but Cain doesn't need to control us. So we got to peel back the layers. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for everyone that came out today. You're such a good God. I pray that people would leave encouraged, even though that's a hard story. Like there's nothing pretty about that story, God. But we're thankful that we didn't get to the end of the story, that you do come to Cain, you put a mark on him, and you protect him. You protect him. And so you do the same for us, no matter where we're at in our shadow. You come to us, you put a mark on us, Jesus, the mark of Christ, and you protect us. And so I pray that people would know that. I pray that people will dive into the darkness in their soul. And once they see it, they can understand it. Once they understand it, they can control it. And we can be not only are you a light to us, but we can become a light to the world. We love you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.